Today, if you look at all the emissions arising from plastic value chain, that would probably be not probably, it's already established that that's plastic production across the entire value chain is, if it were a country, it would be the fifth largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. The petrochemical sector alone is the third industrial source of greenhouse gas emissions because of the massive energy use that's coming from coal. It's also the reason why many countries are trying to phase out their dependence on coal. Here comes plastics, right? So it's like where industry tries to see where they can get away with and business as usual.
So yes, maybe it is high time that we focus the discussion on phasing plastics to just like how we are used to discussing the global phase out of coal. Like always, an interesting conversation is coming your way. So stay tuned. Hello and a big warm welcome to yet another episode on the Mission Shunya podcast. First things first, hope you are doing well. And congratulations, you are part of a growing community of listeners or rather believers who also take action in ensuring that we leave the planet better than the state in which we inherited. Yes, the community is growing. Climate change, sustainable living, net zero transition are no more just buzzwords that you hear. Results are increasingly visible around in the society. Talking of which, we can't take our eyes off one particular component that is omnipresent in the modern world. Yes, you heard it early on. It is plastics. Manufacturing plastics is an energy-intensive exercise, and not to mention the unfortunate waste trail it leaves behind. Well, of course, plastics are useful. We can't get rid of them right away. But at least it's high time that we start the discussions around the phasing out of plastics in the wider interest of the society. As is the tradition, I have an expert who can provide us more insights on this topic. So, who is our guest for this episode and how big a movement is he coordinating?
Hi, my name is Hernandez. I'm the global coordinator of Break Free from Plastic. I live in Manila, and Break Free from Plastic is a global movement of 2,600 organizations and thousands of individuals worldwide.
So you have been associated with Break Free from Plastic movement. So you must be really passionate about plastics in general and the need to create an impact in this space. But give us a background a bit. How did you get here? What's your career journey been so far?
Thank you. I'm currently the global coordinator of Break Free from Plastic. It's a relatively new global movement working on plastic pollution. But prior to this, I've been an environmental activist, still am, for about 25 years, I would say. I was previously campaign and executive director for Greenpeace in Southeast Asia. I was also part of the management team of Greenpeace International at some point prior to joining Break Free from Plastic. As outside the job titles, I've been working mostly on toxic pollution issues, waste, incineration for many years. In fact, I started my work as an environmental activist, focusing on the issue of pollution, persistent chemicals, and plastics, of course, being part of that mix. So in a way, I haven't really left that trajectory of my life work as an activist.
That's interesting. When was the first time that you got into a movement being an activist? When was that?
Well, even when I was in different other organizations like Greenpeace, even when I was in Greenpeace, we've always been working with other organizations and coalitions. And in my case, having worked in the space on waste and pollution, I've also initiated a number of coalitions and networks myself. at the country level here in the Philippines, where I'm based, or at the regional or global level. I was also co-founder, one of the founders of the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. That's called Gaia, uh, and so it's almost like intrinsic to the work that I've been doing, to be always, working with local communities, with local organizations, and then forming alliances and coalitions. So ending up in coordinating role for a global movement is sort of also part of that trajectory.
That's wonderful. I mean, over the last couple of decades, like when you've been active in the space, there is a lot of things that have changed in the way that you operate, in the way that you get people onboarded and things around that. So you did mention that Break Free from Plastic Movement is a recent one, started in 2016. So how did this come about, and what's the origin story of this movement like?
Yeah, that's actually interesting because while many groups who are active members of the movement that currently have been, well, many groups have been working on plastics. They've been approaching this in sort of like from coming from different angles. We had organizations focusing on the waste management or the disposal side of the equation. We had groups who were focusing on ocean pollution. We had groups working on corporate accountability. So uh, there were various entry points, for groups to engage on this issue. So around 2015, and I think it's fair to say that in the last 5 to 6 years, there's been tremendous interest, public interest on the issue of plastic pollution. It's been there. We know that this issue has been building up for many years, but the kind of momentum that this issue has generated among policymakers, among civil society actors, has been quite exceptional, I must say. So in 2016, there was a lot of talk globally around the issue of ocean pollution. You probably saw that video on YouTube about the turtle with the plastic straw, which
Yes.
is, and that sort of helped also catalyze debates on the issue of single use plastics. But the focus of the issue at that time was ocean or marine plastic pollution.
Okay.
And many of the groups who've been operating or working in this space realized, of course, that this is just one aspect of the problem, right?
True.
Because focusing on marine pollution meant that the solutions being propounded or being offered both by industry and policymakers were also just narrow casted on waste management or
Correct.
cleanup. So around that time, a number of what I would call anchor organizations came together. This was a small group of us, around 10 people from different organizations who've been working on related issues in the past that intersect with plastics. And we thought that we need a new approach, a more comprehensive strategy to deal with this crisis. And that process sort of converged in a meeting that we organized in the Philippines in 2016 in a city called Tagaytay, which is like a 2.5 hour drive from Manila. It's a scenic place. Sits on a ridge with a majestic view of a volcano inside the lake. But anyway, that was an inspiring venue where about 60 organizations
Interesting.
then came together with the same sort of like wavelength and approach and analysis of the issue. And at that meeting in 2016, we agreed not only the analysis but also a set of principles that later became the basis for a strategy that we now call the Tagaytay strategy. And that's how basically the movement originated. And from 60 organizations that comprise shall I say, the convening group at that time, we now have more than 2,600. So the growth of this movement has been quite phenomenal. Again, a testament to how this issue has captured the imagination of the public.
Wonderful. 60 to 2000 sounds really phenomenal.
Yeah, and not counting individual, because we have individual supporters as well. And if you look at the membership of many of the organizations that comprise Breakthrough from Plastic, they run in the millions, right? So in for all intents and purposes, Breakthrough from Plastic is really a movement of millions of people sharing a vision of a future that's free from plastic pollution around the world. So it's a global movement, and we believe, of course, that in order to address the plastic pollution crisis, which is a systemic one, we need a strong global movement
Yes.
to really shift the system or transform the system. I guess if there's one thing that differentiates or sets us apart from other groups and formations working in plastics is the fact that as a movement, we tackle this issue across the entire what you call value chain, the entire plastics life cycle. So from production, use, all the way to disposal. Uh, we have our membership in the front lines, right, and connecting the dots in trying to transform that whole system that has brought us to this point of crisis.
That's interesting. Now, from going from an organization that started in Philippines with around 60 members to being a global movement with around 2,000 organizations or brands, as you said, the intent is to look at the entire value chain of plastics and then have an impact in that space. So, what is the driving force?
Yes, well, like I said, we try to have a more holistic approach to the issue of plastic pollution and also come up with holistic, systemic solutions. So it's not just about, for example, cleanups, right? Because you have lots of
Correct.
tons of cleanups being done year in, year out, and yet the problem persists, right?
True.
Again, so we wanted to build on many of these efforts being done in different parts of the world. When we started, we specifically focused on certain key regions like the Asia Pacific, because this is like, the main, shall we say, market for single use and disposable plastics, and therefore also key battleground for the battle to be waged and won.
Correct.
We wanted to focus in Europe because that is where most progressive policy discussions on plastics have been happening. For example, in relation to the EU Plastics Directive, and also the US, where the heart of the petrochemical industry and plastics production is based. Right. So the question in relation to your question, we've been we've been deliberately seeding and building our presences in these key regions. But now we are at a point where we are also expanding our movement presence in Africa and also Latin America, and so in the global South, because more and more we see that the issues being faced on the ground are the same, right? I mean, there's contextual differences maybe, but in terms of the shape of the problem, the solutions being offered, we're practically facing the same challenges.
As you said, although different regions have different problems and different regions are in different positions in terms of policy making and the challenges that they face, the entire issue is global. Now, in addition to the campaigns, what are the other activities that you kind of drive from the movement?
Okay, I guess to answer that question, I can say that we've agreed, for example, as a movement, in order to reach or achieve that vision of a plastic pollution free future, that we also needed a strategy to get us there, right? And so
Correct.
we have our members are across the world working on what I call six strategic pillars. For example, we have groups or member organizations active on the supply side of the equation, the petrochemical industry expansion in the US, which is closely linked to issues of environmental and racial justice. Also, we have member groups working actively participating in the corporate work stream, uh, targeting fast-moving consumer goods companies who rely on single-use and disposable packaging as their product delivery mechanism. And also, we have the third pillar would be the work on solutions, where we partner with cities who want to really seriously implement zero waste systems and approaches, including ways to reduce dependence on single use and throwaway plastics, and also cross cutting would be the fourth element, which is the work on policy, right?
Correct.
And the work on policy happens at the grassroots, national, and global levels. The other cross-cutting issue is what we call the narrative shift, because in order to effect the right set of policies, or I would say the environment, the enabling environment necessary for the transformation to take place, we need to shift many of the narratives that are dominating the conversation at the moment on plastics, right?
Exactly.
So, and we can talk about what some of those myths are that have enabled the crisis that we're in now. And before I go into that, I just want to say the sixth one is really the movement building aspect, which is crucial to our theory of change. That in order to win all this, we need a strong global movement.
Can you run us through a case study or an example where you spoke to cities and you went at the grassroots level and built a narrative to enable positive policy formulation? Can you give us an example?
Yes, there are many examples, and by when I say we, of course, I'm just a proxy for the work being done by our members, many members on the ground
Correct.
that are active in the zero waste space. So, for example, in many cities in the Philippines and Southeast Asia, our member organizations, for example, like Gaia, have been working closely with local government units and trying to implement what we call zero waste systems. And we've had a number of success stories. This is already beyond pilot stage. It's really about implementing systems that divert waste, including plastics, ending up in landfills or incinerators, and really looking at more effective approaches at the front end of that equation, working with waste pickers, organizing communities, and that process has been quite transformational at the local level because we're creating jobs, we're preventing more pollution, and we're sort of forcing the hand of relevant industry players in terms of coming up with alternatives to single use plastics. That's at the local level. And as you know, recently the UN Environment Assembly adopted a resolution to develop an instrument on the global plastic crisis, right?
Yes.
And they have 2 years to come up with such a global treaty. And that mandate, which also surprised many of us, would not have happened without the work that's happening on the ground.
Fair.
Already, we've documented more than 100, at least 140 governments and countries taking action on plastics, right? Whether that's banning plastic bags or straws or instituting extended producer responsibility schemes. Clearly, there is work that is galvanizing and around the issue of plastics, and that that global treaty decision is another arena where we see how the local actually influences the global in this case.
One that's on the policy front, looking at both the global level and also the local and grassroots level. But the other big part of this puzzle in the value chain are the brands, the big organizations who actually give the plastics to the consumers in a way through their products and offerings. Of course,
Yeah,
getting rid of it is a different conversation altogether. But how do you engage with organizations and brands and enable them shift towards a movement, say, breaking free from plastics?
that's a very good question, Girish. In fact, one of our most engaging tactics that we have, employed globally is what we call brand audits, right? So
Okay.
this is sort of like taking the cleanup operation to the next level. So it's not just cleaning up the waste that you find ending up in coastal areas or in nature, spoiling the environment. It's about auditing, what kinds of waste, first of all, and then the brands behind the waste that we've been collecting, in many of these cleanup and audit efforts.
Correct.
So we piloted that tactic, I think 5 years ago. This year is the fifth year when we're doing global brand audits, and the results are quite expected in a way in terms of who the top plastic polluters are. But it enabled us through citizen participation to document who the most consistent polluters are in terms of the brands, and you can see annually the our top 10 global plastic polluters, some of the most recognizable fast moving consumer goods, beverage companies out there. Coke, Pepsi, Unilever, Nestle. They're like what you would call already in the Hall of Shame, and and they know it as well because they're the ones responsible for flooding our markets with disposable plastics.
Correct.
No, and the thing is, because of that tactic alone, we are able to also influence or shift the debate on this question, because before the issue of plastic pollution has been reduced to one of collection or lack of waste management infrastructure, and that this is a problem because people or individuals like you and me, like, well, being responsible, we just throw stuff wherever we want, right? That's how the debate has been portrayed in the past. But with brand audits,
Correct.
we have managed to challenge that narrative to also then point a finger at the responsibility of these companies producing this unmanageable, toxic, and polluting plastics in the first place. Even if you manage to collect all of them, what do you do with them? They're non recyclable.
Correct.
If they're burned or sent in a cement kiln, for example, for as fuel or co-incineration, they contribute to greenhouse gases. They also create toxic pollution. So they're practically unmanageable. So the brand audits, in a way, offer undeniable proof about the culpability of corporations and brands responsible for perpetuating this crisis. They've managed to externalize the costs to local governments who are left with the burden of managing and cleaning up, and to local waste picker groups and communities, right? So we've sort of reinvented that debate from one that is focused on individual responsibility to one that is more systemic in nature, corporate accountability. I mean, it's their decisions and their pursuit of profits that have enabled this polluting conditions that we now experience.
That is fair. Now, you did mention about the kind of impact that you have on these brands by producing a report card and then probably them making the shift. What are the other major impacts that you had in the 5 or 6 years that you've been running this movement so far globally?
So, because of the brand audits, for example, and the pressure that we're putting to bear on corporate polluters, they've been put on the spot. They've been challenged to come up with more systemic solutions to the problem. Like, for example, investing in reuse or setting up bigger targets for reducing their plastic footprint instead of just saying recycling, recycling, recycling. Because that's the other thing. We have been able to expose the limits of recycling. Everybody thought, you, even myself included, in my years of being a waste activist, I bought into that recycling narrative. Thinking that this would solve the problem. But after looking at the track record, 70 years, since commercial plastics production, less than 10% have actually been recycled, right?
Correct.
And if you're really talking of effective recycling, it's even lesser than 9%, probably 2%. A lot of it is just downcycled into inferior products, which ultimately end up as pollution or waste, right?
Correct.
So uh, even just challenging the viability of recycling as a solution. I'm not saying recycling is bad altogether. Obviously, it has a role to play, especially when you talk about other materials out there, paper, steel or bottles, and even in the case of plastics. But with plastics, it's more complicated because there's so many materials being applied, multi-layer, so many toxic additives, which make it really complicated and expensive to process safely,
Correct.
and also limited collection systems. And the fact of the matter is that when you and this is a well-known fact. I mean, it is cheaper to actually make new plastic from virgin plastic instead of from recycled plastic. Virgin plastic is cheaper than recycled, so there's practically no markets for recycled plastics, except for those inferior quality products that we see. So that's why being able to connect this problem to the production or supply side is also important. So, because in the end, Girish, the solution to this crisis will have to be addressing production or reducing production. And if you know that 99% of all plastics produced today comes from fossil fuels, then it becomes clearer that we cannot sustain that kind of dependence.
Correct. I like the way that you have data that's backing up where you want to tackle, what's the problem that you want to tackle. And I kind of align with your point that everyone brings around the narrative of recycling, but it's also looking at the other end of ensuring there is not much that is produced, or there are alternative ways that products are produced, so that you don't end up with the plastics in the first place. So that's a good narrative to have, and I'm glad that this narrative is having a big impact, and I'm sure this will kind of scale up. Talking of which, so what is the plan for the next few years for the movement, and where do you see you can have a bigger impact in the years to come?
Yeah, well, we members are engaged in a number of ongoing campaigns. Some you would call public awareness initiatives. For example, we continue to work with schools, with the youth. We have a growing network of plastic-free campuses, for example, globally. We will continue to advocate for plastics reduction and single-use plastic elimination at the national and global level. So the UNEA process this coming 2 years is really a key contestation area for us, because we know that industry is also going to participate, and they will probably try to justify business as usual by promoting techno fixes. It's almost similar to the climate debate. But I guess the other thing is really heightening this connection between the climate crisis, and the plastic pollution crisis.
Fair.
Both are actually spawned by our dependence on fossil fuels. That's why we keep referring to plastic pollution as climate change's other ugly twin, right?
Correct.
So, and that in order to resolve the climate crisis, we must also address the plastic production and pollution crisis. So, talking about moving forward, that is a key area for us to really establish more firmly the connections. Given the decarbonization efforts being prompted by the climate process on energy and transport, we are watching where industry is going, and we know they're looking at plastics as their plan B. If you look at their production trajectory, they're still looking at quadrupling plastics production by 2050, and that would be disastrous for the climate and planetary health.
Correct.
I mean, just today, if you look at all the emissions arising from what I earlier mentioned, this plastic value chain, that would probably be well, not probably, it's already established that that's plastic production across the entire value chain is, if it were a country, it would be the fifth largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. The petrochemical sector alone is the third industrial source of greenhouse gas emissions because of the massive energy use that's coming from coal. There's also It's also the reason why many of our member organizations are starting to refer to plastics as a new coal, because we cannot we while many countries are trying to phase out their dependence on coal, here comes plastics, right? So it's like we're just playing a shell game here and trying to see what they can where industry tries to see where they can get away with murder and business as usual.
That's a wonderful narrative to build around plastics and climate action. And there are clear linkages, as you say, because the source of production is, again, a carbon intense activity, and we need to go right at that to ensure that the entire value chain is sustainable in the long run. Now, one on a final point, I'll have to ask you this. So, this is a global movement. I'm sure a lot of action happens on ground, happens at local levels. So, how can someone join the movement? How can they contribute? And what is a meaningful contribution? People, of course, will tell I can do it remotely, but what do you think is a meaningful contribution that someone can do?
Thanks for that question, Girish. It's very easy, right? Our movement is inclusive. If people can access through our website, breakfreefromplastic.org, you can join as either individual. If you're part of an organization, maybe your organization could be part of our core or associate membership, and there you'll find a set of principles that we adhere to, the vision, also the strategy. Uh, so, and we know that organizations and individuals arrive at this issue coming from different levels. Some are participating in cleanups, and maybe they want to elevate their engagement more, like really looking at how they can transform the system instead of doing cleanups year in and year out. Right? So
Correct.
and also realizing that even as a consumer, there are costs to the convenience that you associate with your use of single-use plastics. There are communities being sacrificed at the upstream and the front lines of the petrochemical expansion, or even downstream in places where the waste ends up, whether that's a landfill or whether it's an incinerator or even in the oceans, right?
Correct.
It all comes back to us. And we have already clear evidence, undeniable evidence that plastics is ending up in our food, it's in our water, it's already contaminating our bodies, it's in our blood. Not no place in the planet is free from from this pollution, and the consequences of this are just starting to emerge in terms of health impacts and also the climate connection. So this is an issue that affects all of us, and while we believe in individual responsibility, being more conscious about your own consumption habits, we would be more powerful, more effective in affecting systems change if we start raising our voices to support the right set of policies to pressure corporations and companies to do the right.
Correct. No amount of action is kind of insignificant. Every action is kind of significant in raising the voice. And as you said, getting to the right policies and ensuring that every big brand, every big corporation is aware and acts responsibly. I will definitely leave the links to your movement and ways people can join. And I hope a lot of them will probably get in touch with you and reach out to you. So, one, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast and get to know the history of the movement and also the impact that you've had in the space. Wishing a lot of success for you in this movement. Thank you for joining on the show.
Thank you so much, Girish, and really pleasure to be on your show, and looking forward to more future discussions with you.
Well, the bigger the problem, the need for a global movement is even more important. And Break Free from Plastics is doing just that. They want to highlight the need for a systemic change through a holistic approach, tackling the plastics pollution across the whole plastics value chain and ensuring that the right solutions are adopted. If you want to find out more about Juan and the team, just head to breakfreefromplastics.org. I will leave the link in the description of this episode. Make sure you check that. And while talking of collaborations, Mission Chunya is happy to collaborate with Terra Generation, a content agency specialized in telling the stories in climate, biodiversity, and sustainability. They are behind the artworks for each episode that you see. If you want your sustainability story to reach a wider network, head to terrageneration.com. Well, a final note, the next episode will be a different one. A little shift from our theme around a single guest and a single conversation, but definitely around the theme of the podcast. So make sure you return to the podcast in 2 weeks' time. So until then, this is Girish Shivakumar signing off, and as always, thank you for listening.